Can you support Black lives without supporting Black Lives Matter? Right now on The Bearded Prophet. Hey, what's up folks? Adam here on The Bearded Prophet, and I'm sure you're seeing the news, you're seeing the slogans, the controversy, race in America, Black lives, do they really matter? What's happening in our world? Well, I want to talk about that directly with you and have a frank and open discussion, and I'm super pleased to welcome my friend Ian to the broadcast. How's it going?
Doing well, thank you.
Excellent, excellent. And just so if anyone's wondering, Ian and I have been friends for several years. He actually appeared on some previous videos on my channel, so it's not like I just invented this friendship because of the controversy going on in our world. We've been friends for a while. You know, you can look back at my past videos, but I do want to talk about what's going on today. And Ian and I were having a really frank discussion just the other day, and I was really excited at some of the things he had to say and his perspective. So I'm going to kind of turn things over to you, Ian. I would love to hear your thoughts and your reactions to this movement, to the controversy, racism in our nation.
Yes, this is a difficult topic because it's on the news. Everyone's talking about it. It's polarizing a lot of people. Churches are talking about it. Leaders are speaking on it. But there's a few things that I feel like that need to be brought out. So I'll first start by giving my journey in this whole matter. I grew up in the South. I was born in Atlanta. Grew up in the South, Georgia and North Carolina. Went to high school and college in North Carolina. And I grew up understanding racism. Now, I'm not saying it all like it was in the 60s or before. However, I did experience racism. And at the time, that was difficult for me. So it's real, it is real. But one of the things and I had to work through that, the whole thing of like, hey, you can't sit here because, the color of your skin, or people making assumptions because you have darker skin color about your level of intelligence. Those things are difficult, and I had to work through that. So yes, I mean, it is real. However, my concern with Black Lives Matter, my concern with the current narrative is that it's become too political. Now, before all these Black Lives Matter, the George Floyd and the burning of buildings and just the hoopla behind everything, my concern is that there are issues that are not being discussed, and this is my concern. So I'll just start off by sharing one of them. So I definitely understand what happened with George Floyd was murder. Yep. Plain and simple. You can't. There's no other way to parse that. However, there are a lot of details about George Floyd's life that the media tends not to want to talk about. They don't want to talk about the fact that he was a repeat offender. They don't want to talk about the fact that when he did the armed robbery, it was actually in the home of a black woman. It was a pregnant black woman, and it was an armed robbery. That he has been in and out of jail, 8 and 9 different times. That when he was arrested, it's from some footage that came out that he was actually high. Again, I want to make this very clear. Murder is murder, and I hope that the policemen have been, the justice system gives them everything they deserve. But these little details are the fact that the media is censoring some of these details concerns me. And here's my thing about Black Lives Matter in general. So I do believe, because there's 3 words right now that are buzz phrases. One is white privilege. The other one is systemic racism, and the other one is white guilt. We're hearing that all over the place. Everybody's talking about white privilege, white guilt, systemic racism. And here's my thing. Because there's so much blood being shed over this issue, my thing is this. If we're going to talk about white guilt, white privilege, systemic racism, we need to have a clear definition of what those things are first. It's easy. A lot of times when we come into these settings where people are talking about these things, the different people sitting around the table all have a different definition of what white guilt is, what systemic racism is and what white privilege is. And that's part of the problem. We're yelling and there's a lot of noise, but no one really is coming together with a consensual understanding of what we're even talking about.
It's almost like people want to shout more than they really want to solve the problem.
Yes, and understand, really.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll say this too, this has to be said. This just has to be said. Because I grew up in a family where there were racists in my family. And it's just as wrong. The narrative, what we're hearing is, oh, you know, the white cops killing black people, and sure, that has happened. However, I don't hear a lot of people talking about the racism on the other side. Because Martin Luther King made a very clear statement. He said, black supremacy is as dangerous as white supremacy.
Whoa, say that again, Ian?
So in one of Martin Luther King's speeches, he said this very clearly. He said, black supremacy is as dangerous as white supremacy. But you're not hearing that talked about right now.
Because I think people are saying, this country, it does have racial wounds in its past, racial sins in its past. I mean, black folks weren't even guaranteed many basic civil rights until 50, 60 years ago. And so I think people are wanting to correct that, but maybe, are they overdoing it? I mean, would that be a fair way of saying it? Like,
that's a really loaded question. So it really is, because when I was in college, I was a part of an organization called Inroads. So essentially, Inroads was created to bring balance in corporate America, because according to the numbers, there was a bias against African Americans in corporate America. So the organization I was a part of, Inroads, which I think it still exists, maybe it's changed forms, but we were I was a business student in college. So we had to have a certain GPA, you had to apply, have certain credentials, and we would do summer internships in larger corporations to expose us and also to kind of bring us into the corporate system. I believe organizations like that, I support organizations like that. Now, are we overdoing it? It really that's a tough question, because it depends on what sector of society we're talking about.
yes.
Because I personally believe that we do have systemic bias in our educational system. That can be a whole other podcast in and of itself. But I do believe there's systemic racism in the educational system,
Sure.
and in some other systems, but particularly that one.
Yeah. Well, I think the reference I was making to overdoing had more to do with his black supremacy quote, in terms of, like, the idea was, through the civil rights movement, we were trying to take people, like blacks were treated as less than, didn't have basic rights, and civil rights said, no, we want the same rights as anyone else. And yes, there are maybe specific programs like Inroads that said, hey, blacks weren't even allowed to work in some of these companies and have a hard time finding their way in. Let's help them, get into these elite schools that didn't admit blacks until recently, or, corporations. I mean, I think that's good. I think most people support that. But are we moving toward a type of, where it's not just enough to actually be equal, where the goal is actually like a supremacy, like a domination by black folks, or like almost like a reverence, like actually what's happening with Black Lives Matter? It seems like if you don't support it, you are somehow a racist, or there's a problem with you, and you're going to be knocked down or censored or cancel cultured if you don't support it. What do you think about that?
Yeah, and I think a lot of that is the narrative that's going on in the media, and it's unfortunate because, again, the media, and it's true, the media controls a lot of what we think, and it's unfortunate, very unfortunate, but it's true. And so the media has gotten behind Black Lives Matter, and also, I'll have to say this, Black Lives Matter is also, and I hate to use a word like this, and this is going to be a shocker, but and we've seen this before. Black Lives Matter is being maneuvered by political powers. And that, to me, is unfortunate. It's unfortunate because then it becomes less about changing culture than about actually, it becomes less about changing culture and actually making a change than about political statements and maneuvering to get votes in a certain direction. To me, that is deeply unfortunate. When it looks like BLM or Black Lives Matter is being pimped by a leftist leaning agenda.
What would be some of the problems with that, or why would you not support that? Why does that concern you?
Well, it concerns me because it's a mixture. It's like, okay, are we really trying to change lives in an organic way, or are we trying to get votes? Are we trying to drum up this narrative where we get people stirred up to influence them, and that's my concern. That's my concern. I feel like in some ways we're being brainwashed.
Mm. Yeah. Wow. I think one of the things that's concerned me is there is very little questioning. Like you're not really allowed to dig into or say, well, yeah, I support Black lives, but maybe I don't support this particular movement. I mean, who would be against Black Lives Mattering except for maybe a very extreme, blatant racist person? And they do exist. But most people, I think, in America are like, yeah, Black Lives Matter. I mean, I don't hate black people. I want to see blacks do well, and I support equality. Those are good goals. But it seems like this organization has other goals, or goals beyond, like we were talking about the dominance or supremacy or a political agenda. It seems like it has goals beyond just elevating black lives to an equal or to an important status. What have you seen in
Well,
that?
I think it's very ironic that the last time, before all this happened, the last time we saw a big surge from BLM was right before the last election with Hillary Clinton. I don't think, personally, I do not believe that is a coincidence, where you have Hillary Clinton saying, oh, I'm supporting Black Lives Matter, and she was friending some of the leaders of Black Lives Matter, but she's the same person who admitted she supports Margaret Sanger. History lesson: if you don't know who Margaret Sanger is, look it up, and I'll give you a little bit of a insight. Margaret Sanger was one of the founders of the eugenics movement. If you don't know what eugenics is, do some research. There's actually a good documentary out there called Maafa 21, Maafa 21. It's actually on YouTube. It talks about the history of Planned Parenthood, and Margaret Sanger's name will come up multiple times. So do your research. So don't take my word for it. I'm just basically giving you a tip. Margaret Sanger, eugenics movement. It was connected to Nazi Germany. There's a lot of information out there, but that was my concern. You have someone who claims they were for Black lives, but also in the other side saying that they were a supporter of Margaret Sanger. Something's wrong.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and don't let the big words fool you. Eugenics and Maafa. This is something you actually need to look into if you really care about Black lives. Why does that concern you, Ian? What's the concern?
Well, it concerns me is because there's certain bugaboos that the media does not want to talk about. One of them is abortion. I'm just going to go ahead and say we're going to just get out there. Let's talk about it. Abortion, and here's why: because the biggest killer of Black lives in America is not cops. It's not even heart disease. It's abortion. And that's one of the things I'm very, very concerned about, because if Black lives matter, which they do, they honestly do, Black lives matter, why do they not matter to the mothers aborting their children? Now, I know somebody just screamed at me, I'm probably gonna get a crazy email, but let me balance this out. I understand that abortion is a very difficult conversation. I do understand that. I've known some people very close to me that have had abortions. So I understand it's very difficult. However, the way I'm bringing this out is on a systemic level. We're talking about Black Lives Matter. Why are we not marching for the aborted babies? Why are we not marching for the young Black men in our streets in Chicago who are being murdered, day in and day out, Detroit and some of our other
shootings.
Daily, every day. So their lives matter too. So let's talk about that. If we're really going to talk about Black Lives Matter, let's talk about the fatherlessness in Black America, because what that's, again, these are things that actually really matter to Black America, but these are things that are not being brought up in the media, and that concerns me.
Yeah. I think what you're hitting on is the real keys, or not the only, but real keys, very important keys to success for black folks, black Americans, and really all Americans, but let's just talk about the black community, would be protecting black lives in the womb.
Yes.
And the integrity of black families. It's proven that fatherlessness, whether you're black, white, any other race or culture, not having a father in the home, it puts children in a more difficult place, less potential for success, for education, for wealth, more potential for crime and getting arrested or even killed prematurely. Again, it doesn't guarantee things. We could always find people that grew up without a father, white, black, Asian, otherwise, and still succeeded. But the statistics are not lies. that not having a father in the home dramatically decreases the chances of success, whether you're white, black, Asian, Latino, otherwise.
There's a lot that can be said there, but because I study. I'm a student of mental health. So I'm actually in a master's program right now, studying mental health and to become a licensed mental health therapist. Even from a developmental standpoint, the role of the father in the home is critical. I'll leave it at that.
Yeah. Well, but I want to press in just a little bit because I've seen some posts about the specific movement BLM, Black Lives Matter, that actually it said something like we are against or we want to undo or unpack the Western family model. You know, the father, mother, child, the nuclear family. Have you seen any of those assertions?
I have, and I think that is unfortunate because then you have to ask yourself the Bugaboo question: what's happening to black men in America?
Oof.
You have to. Then again, these are questions that matter. What's happening to black men in America? Why is it that our prison system is disproportionately African black men? So if BLM is going to say we want to redefine the family, then you have to answer that question. What about the black men in America? What's going on with black men in America?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a good question. Great question, actually. And one of the things I bring up in some of my videos, and I want to address this to anyone that is out protesting, out rioting, or even just you're really amped up on this new movement, is if you're so quick to defund the police or so quick to take everyone out of power who's currently running things and put this new class of people or new type of folks in power, how are you certain that the powers you take away, the structures you destroy today, the laws you change today, that the new laws, the new powers, and the new people you put in place will be any better? And that's kind of what I'm seeing with some of this Black Lives Matter. We're going to tear down or tear apart or get rid of the traditional family model. Well, are you certain that the new model you're going to put in is actually going to be better?
I'll simply say this: a show that was very popular in the '80s, and maybe I shouldn't bring this up because one of the characters obviously was defamed publicly. But if we can try to put that aside, the Cosbys, and it's just very interesting, just the impact of that show had, and just the positive nature of that show. And it's just interesting how there's a lot that can be said about that, you know. But what I see with this whole redefinition, I'm hearing the same thing from the left. You know, I'm hearing this, you know, even in the realm of counseling. You know, we run into that with family systems therapy and different things of that nature. You know, this whole new normal, and so again, you know, if you're into that. Again, I would challenge you to ask yourself this question: what's happening to black men in America? What's happened to the black family unit in America?
Well, say a little more about that personally, Ian. You're a black man in America. You've experienced, you said at times, racism. I know it's real. I've said that from the start. There are problems. There is a level of systemic injustice that remains to this day. There are still racists and racism in this country. You want to talk a little about your experience and also anything that you would recommend to make things better?
Yeah, I mean, I had to work through dealing with, you know, some of the racial things that happened growing up in the South, and I grew up in white America, you know, so it's, you know, predominantly, And a lot of people say, well, that's colored your perspective. And okay, all right. But here's my thing. And here's what I want to happen. If we're going to have conversations about this issue, then we need to have real conversations. The conversation keeps surrounding the police.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, there's crooked black cops and crooked white cops. You know, it's okay. So fine. You know, you want to make some changes to the police system, make some changes to the police system. But let's now bring in some real power kegs issues. Abortion. Well, let's talk about the Black Family Unit. Let's talk about the educational system as regards to Black people. Let's talk about the prison system. Let's really talk about issues that matter. If we really want to see change, let's really dive into the whys behind the what. And that's my concern. There's a lot of shouting, a lot of noise, but there's not a lot of people talking about the whys behind the what. Why is this the way it is?
Right. These problems didn't just show up yesterday. I think those are 2 points that I make. Like, racism has always been around to some level, and unfortunately, I believe until Jesus comes back, it will be around to some level. I pray less and less and less and less, but I've said before, we're sinners at the end of the day, and we're naive if we think we can come up with a system that will completely eliminate sin, including the sin of racism. Now again, I pray it goes down as much as possible. I want to expose it, get rid of it as much as possible. But guys, you're out there crusading and you have this faith that we're just going to knock it out completely and change the world completely. I just don't believe that. I believe we can make changes, but we can't. We have to get to the root, which is human sin, systemic sin, demonic sin. I mean, there's issues in our world, and these problems didn't show up overnight. They won't be solved overnight. And one other thing that annoys me is we're not looking at all the progress that's been made. And in some ways, we're getting this tainted picture of reality that it's worse than it's ever been, that blacks are being murdered daily by white cops who are just violent, when that's usually not the case. There are murders and bad things that happen, but like Ian was saying, the daily reality is blacks are getting shot most often by other black folks in inner city America almost every day, or probably every day if you look at the statistics. And yet no one's marching in the streets over that. Where's the rage over that? Daily shootings in Chicago, Detroit, other inner cities. And yet we look at, I saw one statistic on blackdemographics.com. It said 38.7, nearly 40% of blacks in America are middle class. Black families are black. And
that's a whole other conversation. Just the caricature of Black America, which is part of the reason why I'm not a big fan of rap music. That's a whole other power keg. Again, these are power kegs. These issues, rap music, rap culture, I get it. I grew up in that. I understand rap culture. I understand the hip hop. I really do as a black person. I get it. However, I'll say this, but rap culture paints a gross stereotype of Black America that does not exist. Sure, yes, they're thugs. Of course they're thugs. But every black man's not a thug. I'm not a thug. I'm sorry. My dad grew up in the ghetto. My mom grew up in lower income Black America. My dad made it. He worked hard. He made it. He stayed up late to get his master's degree, worked a full-time job, supporting an entire family, and went back to school, got his undergrad and his master's degree, had a very successful career. So it's a caricature. It's a caricature. And it's unfortunate because if you really want to talk about racism, it all feeds into itself. The whole, the rap culture, and then how media portrays black people. And then we wonder why. I had a very intense conversation with a really good friend of mine who most of his ideas about black culture came from rap music. And it was a really difficult conversation because I was like, I almost said his name, brother. This is not the case with all of Black America. It is a gross stereotype. And that was an intense conversation because he admitted to me that he would get nervous when, a certain persona of black person would, roll up in the gas station. He would feel threatened. And I said, well, would you feel threatened if that person had white skin? Just saying. Just saying. But anyway, there's like 10 different spin-offs that you can do on this.
Sure. Well, what if someone's watching this, they're like, yeah, but Ian, you're a sellout, or you're, there's all these even worse terms that are often used for.
Yeah, they call people like Larry Elder Candace Owens. I've heard of that.
Mm-hmm.
I'm definitely not a sellout. I am very passionate about seeing change in the Black community. I really am. But what I'm tired of hearing is I'm tired of the narrative. I'm tired of the manipulation. I'm tired of the brainwashing. I'm tired of the left. Every 4 years or so, bringing up this heightened, getting everyone in a frenzy over this issue. And I mean to say this too. Let's not forget what Joe Biden said just a few months ago. He was on the Breakfast Club, and it was a social media firestorm. But in essence, again, you can just fact check me. You can get on Google, you can find the articles. He basically said, if you vote for Trump, you're not Black. And to me, I took that as one of the most racist comments. And this is the person who's running for president. And I'm sitting there like, yeah, that was they're not bringing that up.
Well, I wonder if it's still available. I mean, you have to realize too, media and big media, social media, tech media is also trying to control this narrative. And so I would wonder if that'll even come up in the search results. Maybe it's been pulled down. Maybe that's been censored because we don't want people to know that. And guys, media, social media, it clouds your reality. Again, it's able to paint every time there is a certain kind of crime against Black folks. It's thrown in your face. Oh my gosh, white cop killed a Black man, which is bad. We don't support that. Or used excessive force. We don't support that. But it's thrown in your face and like, this is the worst thing ever. It's happening every day. It has to stop right now. Get out in the streets and riot. But yeah, that did happen. It's bad. We don't like it. But you're not told anything else about the whole story of maybe why the cop was even there. You're not shown the other statistics or the other, 10 other Black folks that were killed that day or that week by maybe other African Americans. You're not told that. You're also not told the reality that, these things happen, but not every single day. But instead, you're fed a different reality. This is happening all the time, every day. It's awful.
Yeah, and I think to go back to the question you asked us about, I think the last question was what can I do or what I want to see changed. So I think that we have to, it's a national issue, but we also have to take a more of a micro perspective because every community is a little bit different. So I'm just going to throw out a name here. Most people have no idea who this woman is. Marva Collins is YouTuber. There's actually a movie. Cicely Tyson and Morgan Freeman did a movie based off of her life, and they also have some stuff on YouTube. Great content about Marva Collins. Marva Collins was in the inner city of Chicago, and she saw a failure in the educational system, and of course these are all Black people, obviously, and she was burdened by that. So she decided, I'm going to start my own school, and it's amazing how the school that she started, they were testing on. Their test scores were higher than even some of the top schools that were predominantly white in Chicago. But it goes to show that is a picture of a woman who sees systemic racism and decides, I'm not going to go with the narrative. I'm not going to just be okay with this. I'm going to make a change. It's people like Marva Collins. I want to see more people, lift her up. Why isn't Black Lives Matter? Most people, I get it. Most people don't know who Marva Collins is. But it's people like that are on the front lines that are actually doing, now she passed away, but who are actually doing this work. Yet you don't hear their names ever talked about. And these are the real heroes of the Black community. Right.
We made a hero out of our repeat con, George Floyd, who, again, we don't condone what happened to him, but we're uplifting this man who had a very checkered past, was even high on drugs. The toxicology report showed at the time the cops, and there was a reason the cops were called, because he was possibly committing a crime or was accused of acting disorderly or in some way. And so we're elevating him as a hero, but you've never heard this woman's name, who actually heroically lifted up many Black lives, and probably the school or schools she started are still uplifting Black lives today to helping them get ahead. Most people don't even know her name. And yet people are out marching in the streets, and rioting and upset over, yes, it was wrong, excessive use of force against George Floyd. We don't support that. That was bad. But part of the solution, yeah, there may be some changes in policing, but what we need to look at, I like what you're saying, Ian, about raising up black folks through education. Let me drop one of my powder keg issues then, and that has to do with the victim mindset or victim mentality.
That's a whole other podcast.
Yeah, because that's kind of everyone, black, white, or otherwise, has bad things happen to them, and nobody has a perfect life. And yes, there is some level of privilege being white in this country, or just natural ease about doing things, and I understand that. But even as a white American, my life isn't perfect, but I understand. I haven't dealt with racism in the way that most black people have, and that's I do understand that. But let me just talk about victim mindset. There's a problem, and what's the right response? We need the government to help you or to lift you up, or we need to riot in the streets, or is it doing things like Marva Collins, like addressing it? What do you think is more helpful here, or what do you think is the solution?
Books have been written on this issue, but when it comes to the victim mentality, this issue is so difficult to put just in a soundbite. But yes, I would say that there are issues and situations. So let me give you another example. It's a Caucasian guy. Caucasian. I use the politically correct term here. I won't say his name, but we'll just call him Bob. I know this person. He lives in Kansas City. Bob. He works in the inner city, and one of his passions are he wants to help black. Predominantly, he works with inner city with black people, and he's looking to help black families get into home ownership. And he has some pretty phenomenal programs and ways that he's doing that. It's not a handout. He actually works with them financially and working with their finances to help them do that. I just want to say he's another hero. He's white, but he's another hero because he's on the front lines doing the work. Now, we go back to victim mentality. It's very difficult because there is a sense of struggle in inner cities and in inner city communities. However, there are people that have gotten out. Let's just put it that way. And it's tough when you talk about slavery. And yeah, slavery is a very difficult topic because I just recently read Frederick Douglass' biography, and he's very explicit about watching a slave master beat his family member to almost to death, and the blood just dripping down off the body onto the floor. He talks about these things. This is pretty intense. But in America right now, there comes a point, because we've all been helped. I've been helped. There are people that have come into my life that have helped me, white, black, otherwise. But it comes a point where we do have to take personal responsibility. There comes a point, even from a counseling mental health perspective. You come in, the therapist works with you. You may have had some trauma. You work through that. And even if you're dealing with issues that connect to your trauma, a part of the healing process is that you own your actions. There comes a point where you have to own your actions. Now, what does that look like in Black America? It's a lot of things. That's a very difficult question. But what I don't like is the idea that somehow my skin color keeps me from rising. That I cannot abide that. Cannot abide that. Because yes, I've had struggles. I've had issues with racism. I'm sure. But in America, as it stands right now, if you want to rise, you can. You really can.
Yeah. Yeah, and
I'm not saying it. Yes, right. and different people, because I can already hear. I can hear the condescending voice of, well, you don't know. You didn't grow up in the ghetto. You grew up in white America. How would you know? There's a lot of stories. I could sit here and rattle off many people, my dad's an example, who started in the ghetto and they worked their way out. You know, they made good choices, and you don't have to stay there. And I don't even like to say like that as if all black people are in ghettos, because even still, like, that feeds into that narrative, like somehow, you know, all black people are sitting in a ghetto somewhere. Like that's not the case either. So I don't want to feed that. But I will say, what I do not like is the somehow, well, because I have dark skin, I'm somehow it's harder for me to rise. I
think it might be harder. There are maybe less doors that open naturally, but is it impossible?
No.
Are you? Yeah, I mean that is in a way pissing on the 40% of Black Americans that are middle class or even wealthy. It's been interesting to see some of these celebrities, some of these people who have made millions of dollars in music, sports, entertainment, and in business and other things, or successful business owners, and yet some of them are still supporting. We need reparations, or Black Lives Matter, and I'm angry. And what do you think about that?
I mean, everyone has their perspective, but I can name 5 different wealthy black entrepreneurs that started in the ghetto. Eric Thomas is one. He's a big time motivational speaker. Grew up in the ghetto. Grew up in a fatherless home, single mother.
Mm-hmm.
You listen to his story, it's moving. And now he's Dr. Eric Thomas. He's a PhD. He is a multimillionaire. He has a very successful, personal development platform and business that he runs. He's just one. I mean, just one of many examples of people that they made different decisions in some key places. Eric Thomas could have been that guy because he grew up in Detroit. He could have been that guy slinging drugs. That could have been him. But he made different choices. And it wasn't easy. I mean, if you listen to his story, it was a struggle for him. But he made different choices at some key points in his life.
Mm-hmm. That's right. What story are we listening to? What story are we telling? Because for every George Floyd, for every person who is unjustly treated by the police, for everyone who's held down by the system, there are others, and maybe we could even argue more folks who have broken out, broken free, gotten ahead, and even become very successful despite the same or similar challenges. The system is the system, and there are problems in the system, but we don't have an unbreakable glass ceiling, so to speak. And we do live in a fluid society. There are sins in our past. There are sins in our present day. America is an imperfect country, but things are working toward improvement. And you mentioned that quote from Joe Biden about if you're vote for Trump, you're not really black. I mean, even I looked at statistics. Even in Obama's second vote, the 2012 election, his re-election campaign, 12% of blacks did not vote for him. So more than 1 in 10 black Americans who voted did not vote for Obama, and who was a black president, our first black president, and a Democrat. And so the overwhelming majority did, but you can even go back statistically, and it wasn't until 1964, which is right at kind of the height of the civil rights movement, that the black vote in this country dramatically shifted toward the Democrats. We're sold the narrative that it's always been the Democrats and we're always for the black folks and all this, freedom and equality, but actually up until that point, or at least it was much more split, and even the majority were voting for the Republicans. Abraham Lincoln was a Republican. And I'm not saying all this to be political expressly. I'm not telling you which way to vote.
But people need to know history.
That's right.
Really, people need to, all of us. We need to know history, especially in the Black America, this whole BLM context. People need to understand history, because there's the old adage, if you don't know your history, you're doomed to repeat it.
Mm.
And that's sad but true. People need to know history. We need to understand the history of Planned Parenthood. We need to understand some of the things that our heroes of the past, the Frederick Douglasses and some of the others, what they said about. And it's just interesting. We need to know our history. I won't belabor that point.
I definitely agree. Well, Ian, I really appreciate you being on the program today. It's a privilege to have you here. And you are doing a very exciting new venture. And why don't you tell us just a little about that?
So right now it's a blog. It's called Autodidactic Society. What an autodidact is, and it sounds really highfalutin, but autodidact just as simply as self-learner. And so if you go to IamAutodidact.com, it's IamAutodidact.com, you can check out the blog. But one of my passions, besides counseling and therapy, is education. I really believe that, one, if we really want to change, obviously spiritually, I think that goes without saying, but if we really want to change and make an impact in the next generation of Black America, it starts in our educational system. I believe that very passionately. So one of the things that Autodidact Society is very passionate about is teaching people how to teach themselves, because I believe there's a massive shift coming in our educational system where some of our educational, let's just say some of the, not pillars, but some of our
foundation or established way of doing things.
Yeah, established way of doing things is changing. Education is massively changing, and I believe that if we're really going to move forward, people have to be able to get educated and pivot really quickly.
Right. And so your blog, and are you going to develop like training courses or videos?
The idea is we're going to start with the blog, and the idea is we're going to have training courses and teaching people about accelerated learning. How do you master a subject? Just because in the economy that we're living in, the days that we're coming into, you have to be able to, like, I was just recently laid off. I'm actually learning some new skills right now, and learning some new skills, I'm having to pivot into something different. And it's going to be key in the days to come to be able to do that very quickly, to learn skills and pivot.
Yes.
So I want to empower people in that direction.
Yes, and praise God, I really believe in that. And that is even good news for someone, white, black, or otherwise. You're in a failing school, you're not getting what you need. This is empowerment. This is, well, I always wanted to learn a certain skill or a language or something, or I'm not being stimulated in my educational system. Well, you have two choices as I see it. You can just slink back, I'm a victim, or well, I'm never going to get ahead, or they're not helping me get ahead, and the school isn't working, or I want to do well, my classmates don't, I'll just give up. Or through things like the internet and these resources, you can say, hey, though none go with me, I'm going to follow the right path. I'm going to walk forward. I'm going to educate myself. And Frederick Douglass, was a very self-taught, from what I remember, and many others.
Frederick Douglass, Benjamin Franklin,
yes.
One of my favorite. Even though, ironically, Thomas Edison was a racist. I'm just going to say it. He was. He had some negative things to say about Black people. However, he was one of America's greatest inventors and was never classically trained in the educational system. But he was a passionate self-learner and reader. And, Thomas Edison is who Thomas Edison is.
That's right. And that's one thing we can't grapple with in this cancel culture is if you sin once, you're forever a sinner. If you ever said a racist quote or did something bad, which is bad, you're just forever tainted. And guys, I don't like racism. I don't like racist quotes. I don't like bad things that people do. But I do believe that there is such a thing as forgiveness. And there can be a level of change and personal repentance and personal change that people go through. I see that most purely through the gospel, through the good news of Jesus Christ. Now, again, I don't just let people off the hook that you can go around and say and do a bunch of bad stuff and, I'm sorry, and then just boom, just get accepted with open arms. I mean, there need to be, sometimes Jesus said things like, go and prove, your repentance with your actions, go and live right.
And there's actually a story a friend of mine shared with me, and I think this is probably to wrap it all up in one bow. There was a story a friend of mine was sharing with, he had a friend, he went into a quick trip. There was an African-American gentleman, this guy was white, an African-American gentleman who made a racial comment toward him, being white. Not knowing him, made a racial comment toward him. And so he made his comment, kind of went his direction. But this gentleman went up to the counter and said, hey, what is this guy paying for? He paid for his gas, he paid for his food.
Wow.
And the guy came back in, and they were like, hey, food is paid for, it's paid for. And he was like, who paid for it? And they pointed to the white guy that he had made this comment toward. And to me, I remember hearing that story and I said, that's it. That right there is how we're going to change the situation. It's person by person, little microcosms like that, because I assure you that gentleman who, the African American gentleman, won't forget that. He won't forget that. And what that is love. At the end of the day, it's what Jesus taught in the Sermon on the Mount. It was a small example of love. And that's how we're going to transform society. It's individuals showing love to one another in an authentic way.
Well said, Ian. And that too is one reason I can't get behind a lot of what I'm seeing in the media, what I'm seeing in BLM, for instance, and some of these other movements. Is it's not based on love, as I see it. It's actually very judgmental, very intolerant, very quick to shout back or to cut off or cancel people. I don't see that as the kind of fruit of what you described, that if someone wrongs you, forgive them and even do a good deed, or try to win their heart with love, not with shouting back.
Yeah, I mean, Martin Luther King talked about these kind of things, and it's just interesting that the Black Lives Matter movement, a lot of his quotes aren't being put forward. What did Martin Luther King says? He says, darkness can't drive out darkness. Only light can do that. Hate can't drive out hate. Only love can do that. These are two quotes from Martin Luther King.
That's right. And so Ian and I are both followers of Jesus Christ. We're Christians. And that's another thing. I think that, all throughout this, what we see on the news is, black folks can't get along with white folks, or people are divided, or we're mad, or whatnot. And yet, you'll see examples where black and white are together in the same church. Again, not always. There can be churches that are mostly white, churches that are mostly black. I'm not even talking necessarily about that, but there are examples where blacks and whites many examples where they're together in the same church building or in the same gym working out, or they can go in a bank. I mean, that's one other thing you don't see all throughout this time, these last few months of all this explosion. Have you been able to go, other than the COVID-19, have you been able to go about your normal life? Can you still talk to a white person? Do you feel every person judging you, or vice versa? Are you more tempted to judge white people when you see them somewhere? I mean, is life unlivable because George Floyd died, or because Black Lives Matter has risen up?
No, I still live my life, and I still live my life. But yeah.
So again, I'm glad these issues have come up. I'm super glad, Ian, that you're willing to talk and talk frankly about them. Maybe we'll have you on the program again. And also check out Ian's site, I Am Autodidact. I'll put the link in the description as well. And I'm just going to say a short prayer for us to close us out. Ian, feel free to pray as well. Father, I come before you in the name of Jesus. I ask for grace. I ask for mercy to help in our nation. Help those with hurting hearts, white, black, and otherwise. And Lord, I ask for truth to go forth in Jesus' name. Amen. Well, thank you so much for being here, Ian. It's a pleasure to have you on the program. And thanks for joining us on The Bearded Prophet. We look forward to bringing you more great content on podcast and video in the very near future. Thank you, take care, and God bless.